I am Dr. Ray Dykes, and this is the Personal Faith Program. This podcast is about the old forms of church are dying. The first old form of church that is dying is the building. Most of the church buildings are older church buildings. They're not the modern church buildings that particularly millennials and Gen Xers are used to. And let me begin at this by talking about millennials and Gen Xers. In the year 2020, 9 years from now, the Gen Xers and millennials are going to be between the ages of 20 and 55. So they're going to be the vigorous people in terms of possible church participants, 20 to 55. By this time, the boomers are going to be retired. The builders are already retired and dying rather quickly. So the Gen Xers and millennials are used to more modern buildings. Everywhere they go, they're modern buildings. And to go into an old church building is like going into a museum, and they're not particularly interested in that. So the buildings are a form of church that's dying. For example, here in Oklahoma City, we see church building after church buildings being used as a restaurant or torn down or whatever. They're going away one at a time. The next form that's dying is the form of the worship service itself. Again, with millennials and Gen Xers, a worship service on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock or 8:30 or 9:30 or whenever is pretty boring for most of the millennials and Gen Xers. There is a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, that's not needed as far as they're concerned. And so the worship service is an old form that's dying. And involved in that worship service is another form that is dying, and that's the sermon itself, the sermon, where the preacher gets into a pulpit and delivers this sermon for at the shortest 15 minutes, at the longest 30, 45 minutes. And the thing about it is that there's no opportunity to ask questions while this is happening. I haven't seen a situation where somebody raised their hand and said, I want to ask about what you just said. That doesn't seem to be in the realm of excitement for Gen Xers and millennials. They want to be involved in a discussion of these issues. They don't want someone telling them what they're supposed to believe. That doesn't work for these two generations. So those are dying forms. Church buildings going away, worship services as that formal hour service, the sermon itself, it's just, they're dying. They don't work anymore. What's going to happen? Well, Christianity is not dying. Even the church is not dying. What I'm talking about are the forms of the church that are dying. And the new forms we have yet to see, except we have seen glimpses of these new forms. Some of the most enlightened churches in the country have figured out where at least one avenue of church in the future exists, and that's in house gatherings. The biggest Presbyterian church in the country is in Atlanta, Georgia, Peachtree Presbyterian Church, and They have house gatherings. Here in Oklahoma City, there are churches, large churches, that have learned the importance of house gatherings. Why is that important? Because for millennials and Gen Xers, this is a place where they can have contact with other people and not just be anonymous as in a worship service where you have pretty much complete anonymity. And so in a house gathering, you can get together there and you can discuss things. You can talk about faith and how you agree or disagree, what you can learn, what you can share with others in a house gathering. And so that's a part of the future. What I'm doing here in the personal pastor program and the personal faith program is working with people on a one-to-one basis on faith clarification. And that too is a new form that the church can take. I see in 2020, 9 years from now, more and more house gatherings happening, more and more programs like this one, like the personal faith program, where people can be working on their faith. There's a huge interest in spirituality in America today, huge interest in spirituality. But let's be reminded of what the statistics are in terms of church participation. At the present time, with these numbers going down constantly, at the present time, 20% of Americans are actively involved in the institutional church. 12% in Canada, 6% in the UK, 5% in the rest of Europe. In the New England states, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, so forth, it's 2% of the population actively involved in the institutional church. On the West Coast, in Washington and Oregon, particularly Oregon, it's 2% are actively involved in the institutional church. Actively involved meaning that they go more than Easter and Christmas to a church service. So these numbers are decreasing as we go on. In the United States, back in the 50s, it was probably 40 to 50% of Americans were actively involved in the institutional church. And we have dropped considerably since that time as these forms have been dying, and they are dying. And so we look for new ways to do church, and we need to think in fresh ways about church, because the interest in spirituality is high, and people need to know what they believe, and they need to learn how to express their faith in conscious and meaningful ways. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next time.